Good evening. I'd like to call the Board of Selectmen meeting to order for Tuesday evening, March 9th, 2021. This meeting is being held remotely as an alternate means of public access pursuant to an order issued by the Governor of Massachusetts dated March 12th, 2020, suspending certain provisions of the open meeting law. You are hereby advised that this meeting and all communications during this meeting may be recorded by the Town of Hingham in accordance with the open meeting law. If any participant wishes to record this meeting, please notify the chair at the start in accordance with Massachusetts General Law, Chapter 30A, Section 20F, so that the chair may inform all other participants of said recording. If anyone is recording this meeting, could you please identify yourself using the raised hand function? I do note that Harbor Media is recording this evening. Okay. And I would just notify the meeting that those members of your Board of Selectmen who are participating remotely this evening are all three of us, myself, Mary Power, Joe Fisher, and Bill Ramsey. With that, we'll move to the business of the board for this evening. Our first order of business is the approval of minutes dated February 16th, 2021. If my colleagues are ready, I would accept a motion.
I'll move to approve the minutes dated February 16, 2021.
Second.
Any further discussion? All those in favor, Joe?
Aye.
Bill?
Aye.
Mary? Aye. Thank you. The next item of business is to authorize the chair to sign the Housing Choice Designation Application. And I believe that we have Emily Wentworth. There she is. Good evening, Emily.
Good evening.
Thank you for being here this evening. I'm going to turn this over to you.
Great, thanks. So we again are here to request that the board authorize the chair to execute a Housing Choice Designation Application. The Housing Choice Initiative, recognizes municipalities that have achieved certain levels of housing growth. Eligibility to become designated as what's referred to as a high production housing choice community is set at 500 units or 5% housing growth over a 5-year period. The designation itself is not just honorary. There are incentives or rewards available to housing choice communities, including exclusive access to housing choice capital grants and then priority consideration for other state funding programs. The designation and therefore access to those funding opportunities lasts for a 2-year period. The town of Hingham was initially designated a housing choice community in 2019, and we are now eligible for redesignation. And that's because the building department issued permits for 643 new housing units between January 1st of 2016 and December 31st of 2020. That equates to a 7.27% increase over the number of housing units reported on our last census, the 2010 census. So if you are interested in reapplying, the application is due this Thursday, March 11th. It's complete and ready to go if we are able to get the chair's signature.
Thank you, Emily. Joe, do you have any questions for Emily about this application?
No, I think it's great. I just want to make sure we get on the record. Emily, is there any financial implication to the town by going this route?
No, the program does require that we commit to completing an ADA self-evaluation and transition plan. We have 5 years to complete that effort, and you've in fact already executed an MOU with the state, right, committing to that based on our last designation. And there are funding opportunities to help us complete that effort as well.
Sure. So I'm not seeing, any hit on the financial side for us going forward. I think there's a positive move. I just want to make it explicit that there's not a downside. So I got no other questions. This is wonderful. Thank you for doing this, Emily.
Thank you. Bill, questions for Emily?
No questions. It seems like a positive move for us to do it, and I'll make a motion when you're ready.
Great. I was proud to be part of the board that submitted this application the first time around. And I think being a housing choice community is nothing but upside for the town. Is there anyone in the public who has a question or wishes to make a comment about this agenda item? Okay, seeing none, Bill, I'd accept that motion, please.
Make a motion to authorize the chair to execute and submit the Department of Housing and Community Development an application to become designated as a housing choice community.
Second.
Any further discussion? All those in favor, Joe?
Aye.
Bill?
Aye.
Mary? Aye. Emily, thank you very much.
Thank you, Emily. Yes.
Our next agenda item is Article AA. This was a potential transfer of a parcel of land on Rockwood Road. The board continued this hearing from last week. I know we were going to try to see if there was some information and some questions that could be resolved. Tom, am I turning this to you or to Emily?
Sure. I was going to say, Emily, don't go far. Thank you. I know Emily's been working on this all week, along with Real Estate Counsel Susan Murphy. Emily, if you want to report out briefly some of the things that you've learned along the way, and I think I might have a recommendation, but I want the board to hear what you're thinking so far.
Sure. So at your last, or not your last meeting, but your meeting last Tuesday, we initially presented this warrant article, which would authorize but not require the selectmen to transfer a parcel of land at 32 Rockwood Road to the Hingham Affordable Housing Trust. At the time, an abutter to the property raised some questions. He specifically referenced that the location of his shed may encroach on the property that is the subject of this warrant article. He suggested that there may be an easement and then raised some potential title questions. He has been so very helpful in providing information to the town over the last week, and also invited me to have a site visit to the property so that I could kind of view things on the ground. What we were able to confirm based on the materials he submitted is that the shed does in fact encroach on the property. There does not appear to be an easement that would allow that. The title work we were provided with continues to support our review that the lot is in fact buildable. So, we're sort of back where we were last week. And I guess the question for the board is whether, you want to explore the opportunity that the property could be transferred to the Affordable Housing Trust. If town meeting were to approve the article, the trust would do further site exploration. So they would be doing soil evaluations to see if wastewater in particular could be disposed of on site. And that would help us verify, not just from the zoning perspective, but from a practical perspective, whether the lot could be built upon before the trust would come back to this board for further public discussion about the opportunity.
Thank you, Emily. Tom, before turning it over to Joe and Bill for questions.
So so Emily's making a bunch of very good points there. Not the least of which is if the lot is transferred, we could do some additional site investigative work to help determine buildability of the property. But I think we can do a lot of that work outside of that transfer, or some of the work anyway, and get a better sense before we actually transfer the property. So I'll tell you that time is at a premium right about now, and bandwidth is short. So I would almost recommend, it feels like a little bit early for this kind of a decision. I would almost recommend that we table this until next year and get a sense of whether or not the property is appropriately buildable or not, and then move and transfer the property next year if the board wanted to the trust. But I think that would give us more time I feel a little bit rushed. I feel like we're kind of running around a little bit and trying to figure out what's the right thing to do in very short order. And I'd rather have a little bit more time and when we have more bandwidth to do that kind of analysis. But obviously up to the board. It's just a thought that I had today.
Thank you, Tom. And before turning it over to Joe, Emily, I know you and Susan Murphy have been putting in a considerable amount of time since last Tuesday. I know that you also visited the site, which I know the abutter appreciated and the board appreciated. So As Tom is, talking about the considerable effort over the last week to try to respond to some of these questions, I just wanted to thank you personally for really driving that. Joe, questions about Article AA, reactions to Tom's thought about deferring this?
Sure. So my understanding of the article is that it authorized but not require the selectmen to do the transfer. And so this is a question really for all of us. Does it make sense to get that authorization and prior to doing any transfer, doing the type of analysis that Emily discussed? So actually doing what Tom suggested, which is you don't transfer it, you do the work. And then if in fact it bears out that it's a buildable lot and it really is good for the Affordable Housing Trust, then we do the transfer and we have the authority. So we could do it that way, which would mean proceeding with this article now. Or if there's a reason to hold off, I would be amenable either way. We clearly do have an ongoing need for affordable housing. And, this is not going to make or break. But I don't see holding up on this article being justified simply because we need to do work, because we can do that work. And then the board will make the determination about whether or not to do the transfer.
Thank you. Bill,
Yep.
Thoughts?
Yeah, Joe, you make a good point. I mean, the article does not require us to do the transfer. We can always advance the article if these issues remain unresolved and we're not confident with the procedure. We can always not move forward on it. So with that in mind, I tend to agree with Joe. We can go forward with it. I mean, we'll probably get questions at town meeting, but we can just say, we can explain to the body that we're not actually going to execute it until we have all our answers, all of our questions answered.
Right. I mean, just if I can continue, the other side of that is that town meeting may want answers before they do the vote.
Right.
And in which case that would be the reason to hold off.
Sure.
So I'm really, I'm not sure which way I fall on this.
Yeah.
Right.
I'll go ahead, Bill. Sorry.
I'm sorry. Yeah, Tom, did Susan have any recommendation either way?
On deferring, no. Emily, I guess one big question, the real question we're trying to determine is buildability, right? And I'm just wondering what level of work could we do that would inform that decision during the year without the site work? Or do you know how much the site work question would cost, and any ideas on any of that?
Well,
or what Susan's thoughts would be on this, as per Bill's question?
Well, Tom, we're going to get you a pair of boots and a shovel. Go out there and
we're a hands-on team.
Exactly.
We're actually looking into a similar investigation or soil evaluation on another property that's owned already by the trust. Our best guess is it's probably somewhere in like the $2,000 range. Minimally, this site is likely a little bit more challenged because it's Rockwood Road, and there are significant amounts of ledge on this property and in the neighborhood generally. So it might cost a little bit more.
I think we could figure that cost out and get some information for next year during the course of the year, and then determine buildability outside of the transfer process.
But if we are looking to use, sorry, Mary, if I can just continue,
Sure.
if we are looking to do a site assessment and have the trust pay for that, is it appropriate to have the trust pay for that work when there's not even an authorization that they may be able to get the property?
So I don't think, if we're not going to transfer the property to them, I'm not sure we would ask the trust to pay for it. But
right.
at $2,000, that's something that we can figure out internally on the town and determine the buildability question.
Yeah. It's really kind of interesting because while this article is for a very small parcel of land, I feel like we have another article that is in many ways asking this same question, which is the HMLP article. It seems to me that we ought to be aware that we have two potential articles asking town meeting to authorize transfer of land subject to a future vote by the board. For purposes of consistency, I think I would prefer that we hold off on this until next year. I worry that there may be questions we can't answer. I think in doing some of that assessment of buildability, we may find some other options. And as I'm thinking about an article that was actually taken off of our agenda for tonight, I see many of the same issues and concerns. And for me, I would sort of be consistent. Having said that, we don't always have to vote the same way. It doesn't, if we have too many unanimous votes, we're probably not aiming high enough, but I think I have enough reservations about this article that I don't think I could support it going forward at this time. But I would also, having said that, we can put this to a vote. I might just ask if there's anyone in the public who wishes to ask a question or make a comment with respect to Article AA. Okay, seeing none. Bill and Joe, how do you want to move ahead? Bill?
If I could just add one other point too, Mayor. A lot of the due diligence we're going to do over the next year will save us time if we waited the year and transferred the property in at town meeting of 22. So if we moved on it now, it's going to be a couple months to a year anyway to get all this stuff done. If we get it done now and then we transfer it next spring, it's that much quicker. So I'm fine waiting as well. And
I agree.
And sitting on the trust, this particular project doesn't have any exigency that I know of. So I'm happy to defer it. So Tom, would we make a motion to withdraw or no action?
So I would think you'd have to vote no action, and we'll speak to Tim White about withdrawing if that's his pleasure. Otherwise, he, as the proponent of the article, he could decide to move forward without any support. But I don't know that would happen.
All right.
Yeah.
With that, then, I would make a motion to recommend no action of Article AA.
I'll second that.
Any further discussion? All those in favor, Joe?
Aye.
Bill?
Aye.
Mary? Aye. Okay, next article is Article U, the Plymouth River School window authorization to borrow. I believe I saw John Ferris on the line. Oh, hi, John. You moved in my Zoom screen. Thank you very much. I know you've had a long day and we appreciate you joining us. Tom, I think the reason the board deferred this vote was to see if by chance we had any additional information on the cost. John, I don't know if we have anything at this time.
Yeah, well, we don't have anything additional at this time, but what's transpired since the last time we talked is we have made contact with the OPM, who is now on board. That's ACG Architects. And we also have the architect on board as well. Tomorrow, they're going to take their first walk around Plymouth River. So, and I'll be there too. That's going to start at 12:30. It'll take them a couple of hours. But when we had the orientation with them, we told them our urgency of trying to get some better estimate for this. So maybe tomorrow I might know a better time frame. I mean, my feeling is this is going to get pretty close to, it may not make print for a warrant, but it would be pretty close to, town meeting day. But I think tomorrow after that walk around, I'll have a better feel. I'm happy to come back anytime and let you know what I know about it.
Yeah. Bill and Joe, what I might recommend for purposes of keeping this moving forward, because I think we all agree that this is an important infrastructure project for the town, is that we would vote action on this so that it could be referred to the advisory committee, and to the extent that something comes in with the costs that causes the board to reopen the hearing and have further discussion, we do that. But I think it's a long shot that would happen. And while I appreciate John's offer to come back, I think he's in enough night meetings that maybe we don't have to ask him to do that. Is that agreeable to both of you?
Sure.
Yeah, it is. I would just note for the record that I believe that one of the 40B projects, the Alliance project, as part of the development agreement, they paid $1 million to the town specifically to fund this. So important to keep in mind that's where the funding is coming.
And the
Yeah.
MSBA reimbursement will be probably in the same range as the Foster feasibility study right now, which is somewhere in that 33% range as well. So.
Thank you. And I'd note that my former colleague, Paul Healy, is on the line for a different agenda item, but Paul and I, as members of the board, we were the ones who had the privilege of making the decision of where that money was to be allocated. And we felt that was important to do. We felt that it was relevant to the project because the Plymouth River, the school district is, if there are any students at that facility, they would be attending Plymouth River School. So we thought that there was a connection there. But we also knew that this was an important project and that Hingham had to put some skin in the game in order for some of our state dollars to come in. So we were proud to take that vote. We are pleased that the MSBA has accepted us into the repair program. Is there anyone in the public who has a question or comment with respect to Article U? Seeing none, I'd accept a motion.
Sure, I'll move to recommend favorable action of Article U.
Second.
Any further discussion? All those in favor, Joe?
Aye.
Bill?
Aye.
Mary? Aye. John, thank you. And I also noticed
Thank
that Carlos De Silva from the school committee is on, and I know he's the chair of long range planning. So Carlos, thank you for making yourself available this evening as well. Next item of business on the agenda is Article N. This is design and construction bid funding for the public safety facility. The board had one hearing last week on this article, and it was that was continued. Tom, I'm not sure who I throw this to. Is it to you, to Joe, to Paul Healy? I see a lot of possibilities here.
So if Joe wants to tee it up, well, we can do that. I'll tell you that Paul Healy from the Public Safety Facility Building Committee is here to enlighten us.
I will yield to my senior colleague, Mr. Healy.
No pressure here, Paul. Enlighten us.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the board. For the record, my name is Paul Healy. I live at 209 Main Street in the town of Hingham, and I'm a member of the Public Safety Building Committee. And just to follow up with the earlier explanation given by the chair last week, we're in here looking for funding with respect to the design funds that we need in order to design the project, the public safety facility contemplated to be placed on Lickett Street. We also need, as required by state statute, an owner project manager or an OPM. This is an extremely important component to a project of this nature. And some of you may wonder, well, what does all this entail? Well, the Public Safety Committee for the next 10 months will meet on a fairly regular basis. And so far we've been meeting once a week, every other week, working meetings. And we'll work with Castle Booz, who's the design architect that we've selected, to come up with a design proposal. Previously, the town saw the results of a feasibility study. What the final design looks like is unknown. However, we will work closely with the police and fire chiefs for a joint facility that incorporates the needs of both departments into a facility that serves both presently and into the future. This is an essential facility, which requires it to meet heightened code requirements due to the nature of the work that's done here, public safety. So, this is going to require close work with Castle Booz and whoever the eventual OPM is that is selected by us, or through Mr. Mayo, actually. In light of that, we'll be working on figuring out the needs of each department, the mechanical aspects, the engineering aspects, the budgeting aspects. It's a very involved, intense project. We're very fortunate to have Mr. Garrity on this committee. He's been involved in a number of these projects previously in the town of Hingham. We have some interesting overlays because there are security considerations that the Department of Public Health imposes or engrafts additional requirements onto a facility of this nature. The fire department has specialized needs. There are zones that are, which I'm learning, hot zones, areas of the building that, are set aside so to reduce the possibility of disease or illness affecting the firefighters who man it. So that's just a brief overview of it. It's a very intense project. We've calculated that we'll need 1.2 million for KBA and 400,000 for OPM. Mr. Mayo can speak to the specifics of that should the board be interested. But we're working to build, a project that meets all the code requirements, would have the flexibility to be modified depending on the needs of the town going forward into the future, and certainly be, the kind of place where, firefighters and public safety police officers can effectively discharge their duties and responsibilities to the town of Hingham and its residents. So we're on the path.
And Paul, my understanding from last week is that the original plan was to request funding for both design and construction documents, but the building committee is actually recommending that at this time we only go forward with design. Is that, and that's what requires the OPM. So it's as we envisioned this several months ago, this request is a reduced scope than what was originally contemplated?
That is correct.
Okay. Joe, you're the public safety liaison. You've been involved. Questions or comments about Article N?
Yes, I'm going to have some questions and some comments. Question, and I'm not sure to whom this should be directed. Why do we need an OPM if we're not doing the actual construction activity?
Yeah, it's a great question. Joe, do you want me to take it, Paul, or do you want it? You
can do it, Tom, and if I need to pipe up, I will.
Sure. So, and JR is here too to make sure that I don't stumble. But Joe, it's a great question. As we know, an OPM is required by state law for a project of this scope. We need one now. Probably 80% or more of the OPM's work will actually be done, as you say, during the construction phase. But we need one up front to evaluate the design process as we move through it. And rather than doing a procurement now for one OPM to help with the design effort, and then doing another procurement that could potentially land a different firm as an act as OPM during construction, which would cause problems at another time, we wanted to do one OPM and do that procurement now, understanding that most of that effort and money won't actually be spent until we're into the construction phase.
So that was my next question, which is, that's a lot of money, $400,000 for real preliminary work. What I'm hearing is it's authorized, but we're not going to be spending that all, right?
That's right. That's
okay.
Right.
At the special town meeting we had, there was a call for holding off doing any further work on this until other work in town was done. And my view has been that we need to move forward with this. It's not just police and fire, it's also our senior center that is dependent on this moving forward. And that holding off at this stage would simply delay and not really save the town any substantial money. As Paul identified, a number of aspects need to be worked out. This is a very complicated process, and it's not like we can snap our fingers and then construction begins. So we need to keep the ball rolling. The committee needs to act on a consistent basis. I heard you're going to have probably 11 meetings over the next year at least. And yeah, so it's a lot of work that we cannot defer. And so I'm really glad and encouraged that this is before us now so we can move forward. I have no other questions. Thank you.
Joe, do you mind if I just add to that just for a second,
Sure.
Mary?
Please.
I just wanted to point out that it won't, not only will it not save money, it would actually probably cost us money, a delay, just be, inflation being what it is. If this project were pushed out, it would end up costing us money.
Great, thank you.
Bill, questions on Article N?
Paul, thank you for the presentation. All of my questions were answered last week when Mr. Garrity spoke. Just a quick comment, in terms of our capital needs in town, I would personally rank Foster #1 and this #2, but I'm very comfortable with these two projects moving on a parallel path. I think within the next year, this project will start coming to fruition, but so won't Foster. So kind of happy that we're both moving together, both projects, and looking forward to having both of them done, at least started to be done in the next year or two. So thank you.
Tom, I wondered if you could please speak to the funding, and specifically, how do you propose this work be funded?
Sure. Thank you, Mary. So the proposal is that we have what's referred to as restricted fund balance outside of our general fund balance in the amount of $1.25 million from the sale of the Hersey House many years ago. So that money is available, and that's in the amount of $1.25 million. We need 1.6. That would leave $350,000 coming from our fund balance. I'll just add some additional info to that. I did speak with town council and John Coughlin, and he has determined that the proceeds from the sale of the Hersey House are available for use for this purpose, contingent on prior authorization from town meeting, and that our intent would be to roll that authorization into an article. Into the article. So we believe that the senior center and the police department are directly impacted by the funding of this article, as it's a required step towards building the new police department. But so use of these funds for that purpose is in keeping with the original intent of these funds for remodeling town hall and the senior center. So like I say, the balance from outside of the Hersey House proceeds would come from fund balance, but I think that that's a funding process that makes sense and works and is appropriate.
And just a question, either Tom, it's for you or for Paul. Assuming town meeting acts favorably on this, my understanding is that then next April there would be a request for money for construction bid documents. Is there any possibility that this project would be put before town meeting for construction funding before Foster School? As I'm hearing the timing, I'm thinking that wouldn't be possible, but I just want to confirm that.
The timing, as I've spoken with KBA about this, the timing would be we do the design between now and next April's town meeting. And next April, we would, if the design came back and the board and AdCom and everybody felt it was appropriate, we would ask for the construction, for money for the construction documents, move forward with that, and have all of that in place enough so to provide us with, as is common, a proper estimate of the actual construction costs that we would move forward with in the fall of 22, which would be in keeping with the school department's the school department's process with regards to Foster School.
And we confirmed today with we actually were in another meeting with John Ferris, but one of the things that came up is that in working through the MSBA process in Foster School, the earliest that we would be invited into the construction phase of the project is July of 22, which would set the stage for a fall of 22 town meeting for construction funding for Foster. And I think both Dr. Austin and John Ferris have pointed out, oh, there's John, he's back, that that one of the things that the MSBA stresses is that you can't get ahead of them in the process, and that if you do, you potentially jeopardize funding. I would just add one other thing. During the 1950s, Hingham built a lot of buildings. We built Plymouth River, we built Foster School, We built the North Fire Station. We built the Constitution Fire Station. There was a lot of building that was going on during that time. And I think what we found is that all of these buildings, while they have served the town well, they have all outlived their useful life. And we have a number of infrastructure issues that need addressing in the town. And, you know, just like the people who preceded us 80 years ago, our challenge is to move forward with as many of them as possible. And while certainly it's not acceptable for our teachers to be teaching in a building where, as we saw yesterday, the boiler failed and school had to be held remotely, and that we don't want our children attending a school where that happens. One of our colleagues has 3 children in foster school right now. At the same time, the men and women who work in the Hingham Police Department and the Hingham Fire Department deserve equally respectable workplace environments, particularly the firefighters, because when they're on duty, this is their home. I appreciate that this design process is going to be a very public process, because Paul, I think you heard me in the fall expressing some reservations about whether a 50,000 square foot facility, while it could fit on the site, whether it was really what we needed. And, you know, I think that I understand that all that is going to happen in design, but I really do think that we need to be mindful of sizing this in a way that the departments can do their job, but that is also mindful of the fact that we as taxpayers will be paying for this facility. So I appreciate that this will be an open process, and that in fact we have to go back to town meeting to get the construction funding, which to me is kind of one extra assurance that the citizens are comfortable with the scale and scope of the project as it moves forward. Paul, before opening it up to questions, was there anything else you wanted to add?
I would just like to thank Mr. Frey and Ms. Riley for their able assistance in this process. It's very pleasurable to work with them. And I look forward to continuing doing that.
Thank you. Is there anyone in the public who has a question or wishes to make a comment with respect to Article N? Seeing none, I'd accept a motion.
I'd make a motion that we take favorable action on Article N.
Second.
Any further discussion? All those in favor, Joe?
Aye.
Bill?
Aye.
Mary? Aye. Thank you very much. Paul, thank you very much for attending. JR, Kathy, thank you for your assistance, and we look forward to your continued efforts. The next article that the board is taking up this evening is Article BB, a citizen petition to amend the general bylaws of Articles 2 and 3. Again, this is a continuation of a hearing that the board began last week. I see we are joined by the petitioner, Mr. Patch. Thank you for being here again this evening. I'm going to start out. Bill, I think you had asked that that the board hold off on voting. You had wanted to gather a little bit more information. So I think I might just ask you to comment as to whether you've gotten the information you need, if you have any further questions, and if you're ready to move forward this evening.
Sure. So yeah, a couple comments. Again, I want to emphasize that I think this petition is very well meaning, and I think it's a good one. Between last Thursday and today, I was able to verify that the senior center at times does have about 200 or so volunteers over there. I also had a pretty long conversation with Eileen about how those names are assembled at town meeting. She informed me that the list with respect to employees who pass away is actually given to her by the moderator. And she believed that list came from our retirement board or personnel records. So she gets the list from Mike Puzo and she reads them. She described to me the work that she does when she reads the veterans' names is a lot of work that she does on her own, looking at the paper, speaking with Keith. And after speaking with her about some of the administrative background here, what my feeling is, I am again concerned that we may miss someone and we will unintentionally hurt family members. So that's going to be where I come down tonight. I like the idea of this though. And, what I would recommend is, I think Tom recommended in his presentation is that, the clerk obviously will be Eileen's successor, whoever that might be, does put that database together and does take time to coordinate with Jennifer. So in the future, maybe when that database is created and we coordinate better with Jennifer and some other people in town, we're going to have safeguards in place to ensure that we will be able to do this and honor our volunteers. But I think that's a discussion left for a future year.
Okay. Mr. Patch, since you're the petitioner, I think maybe before the other members of the board comment and we open it up to the public, did you have anything else to add or to respond to any of Bill's remarks?
Well, I've spoken with Eileen at length about this as well. And I just want to make sure the board understands in terms of, I believe the options available to them to make their recommendation or their position known to town meeting that, this isn't a binary situation. It's not a situation where it's either you're for it or against it. There's also the time-honored option of referring it to committee. And what I'm hearing Selectman Ramsey say is he thinks there's some merit here, which I would agree with him, but perhaps we need to flesh this out a little bit more to see, to put it in a position where it can actually put into effect. So I would ask the board in terms of its consideration of what position it wishes to vote on tonight to consider that as an option as well.
Thank you. Joe, anything to add before opening it up to the public?
Well, I do, but first I just want to clarify. I think our options this evening, unless this warrant article is withdrawn, is actually to vote either action or no action.
That's correct.
So
we can't amend a citizen
right.
petition warrant article.
It wasn't clear to me, Tom, whether you were suggesting that you would withdraw it so that we then could refer it to a committee. It just wasn't clear where you were at.
Well, again, just so everybody's clear, technically this board's action tonight is actually, to my understanding, not part of the actual legal process of town meeting hearings. That would be the required hearing is before the advisory committee. And if it were a zoning article, we would also by law required to have a hearing before the planning board. So this is an instance where this board is basically trying to vet warrant articles and make its position known to town meeting. Now, I've done town council work in the past, not for Hingham, but for a different town. And, essentially there's always, the option to essentially refer it to committee because my understanding is you're expressing an opinion on the action that should be taken at town meeting by town meeting. And one of the options that town meeting has is to refer to committee. And so by way of example, last year there was a tree warrant article, I believe, that came before you guys. I wasn't involved in that, but I was at the advisory committee meeting where that was brought up. And it seemed like the advisory committee was under this impression of this binary, options available to them. And I made them aware of the fact that actually in town meeting, referring to a committee is one of the legal options and often does happen if you go back and look at the records in the town, not just saying that in this town, it's been done many, many times. And again, it is a legal option. So what happened was the advisory committee actually had a split vote last year on that tree article, and several of them voted to refer it to committee. And then ultimately what happened was when it got to town meeting, the advisory committee apparently had a subsequent vote and actually the recommended motion was to refer it to committee. So I think where you're expressing your view on the action that town meeting should take on this, it would be no different than if you stood up at town meeting and said, well, we don't think that, we think there's merit to this, but we don't think it is fully formed in order to have a yes or no on this in terms of our position, and therefore would recommend that it be referred to committee. I mean, I could get up at town meeting and do the same thing.
Right. I'm going to jump in here because I actually was involved in the tree preservation last year, so I can clarify this. When a citizen petition is offered, a citizen petition warrant article is offered, neither the Board of, well, first of all, the Board of Selectmen basically, as Mr. Patch has said, we basically vote whether we recommend favorable action or no action, as we've done both things tonight. A citizen petition is a little bit different. The advisory committee has the authority to modify a recommended motion that comes before them. Now, the trick is they can make it smaller, but they can't make it bigger. So that's in general. But a citizen petition, the advisory committee cannot modify the recommended motion. It's either a straight up, yes, we want to go ahead with it, or no, we don't. Last year, as Mr. Patch is saying, there were some members of the committee who felt that the idea had merit, but again, their hands were tied because it was a citizen petition. They either had to vote yes or no, and it was a split vote. The petitioner actually was the only one who could come forward and amend it on the floor of town meeting, and that's what the petitioner did. That is certainly, that is certainly a possibility, but we do not have the ability to modify this motion, and neither does the advisory committee, again, because it's a citizen petition. As I think about this warrant article, I would echo my colleagues' thoughts. I have a bit of a glimpse, having done talent bank for 6 years and trying to keep track of people who are on committees and not on committees, of many of the challenges associated with record keeping. And while I think this is a wonderful idea, I am concerned that in the process, because it is kind of self-reported, that people will be overlooked. And it troubles me to think that that could happen. And I also am understanding that, we are about to have turnover in a very key position, the town clerk. So I think I would be inclined to make a vote of no action at this time. Bill and Joe, that's kind of where I'm coming from. Tom, I'll let you respond, and then I'm going to open it up to comments from the public.
Thank you. So I was actually at the advisory committee meeting last year when they actually voted, a minority of them voted to recommend, their vote was to refer it to committee, because you're not changing the warrant article. What you're doing is you're taking a position on the action that should be taken on the warrant article. So it is, you recommend it pass. You oppose it, or one of the options, one of the procedural options is you can refer it to committee. You can do things like table it. These are all essentially motions at town meeting on how, procedural motions on how the warrant article should be dealt with. It's not a substantive, it doesn't go to the substance of the article itself. And you may want to double check with John Coughlin on that.
Sure.
So basically, but this is your party, so to speak. You're free to, take a position that you're going to either vote, one way or the other, either for or against, and that as far as the three of you are concerned, that referring to committee is not an option. This is your hearing, and if that's the case, so be it. I just want to make sure that you guys, at least from my understanding, you guys are clear on essentially what a motion to, or essentially be a motion to refer to committee. It's a procedural motion. It doesn't go to the substance of changing the warrant article itself. It's how we're going to dispose of this warrant article.
Thank you. Is there anyone in the public who has a question or a comment with respect to Article BB?
Mary?
Yes.
So I actually did have some comments that I did want to reflect. I mean, I think Tom's sentiment of really recognizing and honoring our volunteers is an important one for us to consider. I'm not convinced that this approach is the right approach. I think that Article BB intrudes on aspects of the town meeting that are customarily not subject to the bylaw, to the general bylaw. The bylaw has provisions that relate to town meeting, like call of the meeting, procedural requirements for the conduct of the meeting, times for speaking, and things like that. But really, the tradition in Hingham has been that when we begin the meeting, there are a number of introductory matters that are not substantive and that require neither a warrant article nor anticipate a vote of the meeting. And they really don't lend themselves to a vote. It's like the recitation of the Pledge of Allegiance, the invocation by a member of local clergy, recognition of distinguished visitors. We welcome the guests of the meeting, the summary points set out in the moderator's message, and recognizing certain town employees who've passed since the last meeting. And those names are drawn from the town's retirement plan records. That's where they come from. And the moderators, not just our moderator, but throughout the Commonwealth, they have their own handbook. The Massachusetts Moderators Association publishes a guidebook. It's called Town Meeting Time, a Handbook of Parliamentary Law. And they actually address these issues, and they say the opening of the meeting is the time for those kinds of expressions. No article is necessary. So it really, I think, is inconsistent with how town meeting is run to put this provision in the general bylaw. Second, I'm concerned about whether it's appropriate to have a vote on the list of names. The proposed article here would require it specifically asks for a town meeting to vote. In my experience, Hingham residents are famously outspoken. And I'm not really sure I want to open up the possibility for someone to object to or to vote no to honoring persons who they may maybe thought didn't do a good job while they were on the committee or were no-shows. Those sorts of things are not appropriate. And those are, in fact, the rights of residents to speak and to debate when something's up for a vote. So I would be real concerned about structuring this as a vote, which is what the article proposes. I think doing it the way we do now, which is simply having the moderator read a list, in this case of the deceased employees, is the way to go. And I think Bill's talked about the time and the concern about making sure that we get the list right. So my suggestion is if the goal is to honor our volunteers, and I think that's what it is, that we really should be exploring other opportunities that don't turn turn town meeting perhaps into a memorial service or expand opportunities that are really not appropriate. Holding a special event honoring volunteers, both alive and deceased, with a celebration and a reading of names. Something like that, I think, would be more in keeping with the spirit of what's being proposed. So I also would be proposing no action on this.
Okay, thank you. I think at this point, I would accept a motion.
Happy to do it. I'll make a motion.
Sorry, Bill.
Oh, sorry.
Go ahead.
Ready to go? I'd make a motion to recommend no action of Article BB.
Second.
Any further discussion? All those in favor, Joe?
Aye.
Bill?
Aye.
Mary? Aye. Tom, thank you. And you're going to be presenting this to the advisory committee. One of the things with warrant articles, the Board of Selectmen, while we advise, it is the affirmative motion of the advisory committee that is put forward for town meetings consideration. So we thank you for bringing this to us, and we know you're going to continue to go along this process and head over to advisory. So thank you.
Yeah, just so you know, that what I did was, in speaking to Bob Curley, because he's the liaison handling this, I had asked him to defer their vetting of this until you guys had an opportunity to look at this. So that's,
Yeah.
I appreciate you doing
Thank you.
that. Okay.
Yep.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
you.
Yeah,
Good night.
bye.
Next item of business on the board's agenda is a letter of support for the Executive Office of Energy and Environmental Affairs grant application for the Town Pier Repair and Resiliency Project. We're joined this evening by Town Engineer J.R. Fry, who has provided the board with some information. J.R., could you just give an overview of what you're seeking here?
Sure. I'm looking for a letter of support from the board that demonstrates the town's commitment to improving the safety and ability to safely access the water along Town Pier, along with protecting the town by improving resiliency and addressing fully both the condition now and in the future of the Inner Harbor wharfs. What this will do is, this is specifically a letter that will be addressed to the Executive Office of Environment and, oh, it slipped my mind, but it's in the Governor's office, and it is in support of a grant award for up to $3 million, which would significantly assist in the repair and rehabilitation and improvements in resiliency for our town pier.
Thank you. Joe, questions for JR? I think he's looking for, as he said, just authorization to allow the chair to sign a letter.
Sure. Jared, could you just review for us what the funding opportunities are, like in terms of dollars?
Sure. So there are a number of different funding opportunities that we are pursuing of various dollar amounts. This one is a funding opportunity through the Governor's office that is able to fund up to $3 million in seawall repair and resiliency improvements. We are also looking at MVP awards. That's the Municipal Vulnerability Program. And with that one, I've had some back and forth with the grant administrators. That one looks to be more of a piece of the project where we might be able to get somewhere in the order of $90,000 to $150,000 to improve access for people along the harbor front. We're also looking at a FEMA brick grant, which we were not able to move forward with at this time this year, but we will continue to pursue that in the future. The FEMA brick grant could be as much as $5 to $10 million per application. So we have 3 different wharves that we will be pursuing in the future. Well, we're pursuing Town Pier now, but 2 additional wharves that for projects that we will be pursuing in the future. So that would be 2 more opportunities to receive that kind of funding.
That's great. And to the extent that you need additional letters of support for additional funding opportunities, don't hesitate to bring it to our attention. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bill?
Mayor, you mentioned earlier the capital needs of the town, you know, with aging fires, aging schools, aging fire stations, and we also have aging seawalls. So, JR, thanks for applying for the grant, and happy to make a motion when you're ready.
Yeah, and I would just add that last week, as we were hearing from the Harbor Development Committee, as the town is moving forward with many of these grants, in order for the town to be given serious consideration, we not only need letters of support, but we need funding commitments from the town. It's similar to how we'll go ahead with Foster School. When we borrow money for Foster School, we will actually appropriate the entire amount for the school, including what the MSBA will pay, because that's part of their process. So as we want to work to best position Hingham to receive grant opportunities, this is an important step. Does anyone have a question or wish to make a comment with respect to this letter of support? Bill, I'd accept a motion.
I would make a motion to vote the vote list. Make a motion to authorize the chair to sign the letter of support to the Executive Office of Energy and Environmental Affairs for the town Pier Repair and Resiliency Project grant application.
Second.
Any further discussion? All those in favor, Joe?
Aye.
Bill?
Aye.
Mary? Aye. JR, thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Good evening.
Good evening. The next item of business on the board's agenda is the FY22 financial forecast update. We're going to do this in a couple of pieces. We're going to start by asking our town administrator to provide an update on the financial forecast. The forecast group met earlier today, and so Tom, I will turn it over to you.
Great. Thank you very much, Mary. And Michelle will work her magic. And before us will appear the forecast. Okay, so we're going to do this very briefly on the forecast, and then we'll jump into another document that will highlight the changes since the last time we saw this forecast. So all I'm going to do here is, Michelle, if you can, well, you're probably in a PDF. Is there any way to highlight the bottom, the total uses? I know on my side, it's the words are getting in the way. Anyway,
and the words are getting in the way here too.
So rather than burying the lead here, I could tell everyone that we are showing right now on this forecast a total total uses excess or shortfall of an excess of $274,197. That was accomplished in a number of ways, but I just point out that this is our normal process at this time of year, and it is our requirement to bring a balanced budget to town meeting. So that's one of the reasons why we're showing the formal forecast this way, but obviously there's a lot of decision making that needs to happen before we go to town meeting. But we do need to show the forecast in this manner. If you want to jump over to our other document, Michelle. Okay, thank you very much.
Can you see that okay? Is it big enough?
Yep, so. All right, so again, without burying the lead, we're showing a surplus, and the way we're doing that in large part is by removing all of the additional requests. So that's the municipal additional requests, the educational additional requests, and the capital additional requests from the forecast document. We are not removing them from consideration and discussion. We're removing them from the forecast document because, again, we're obligated by Mass General Law to go to town meeting with a balanced budget, and then we have options to fund things outside of that process. But I just wanted to be clear on that point. So, Michelle, as we tick through these forecast update changes, do you want to start with the first one and explain to everyone the recreation expenses change?
Sure. So this one was basically a formula error in the spreadsheet that we're using. So in the past, the rec department budget has only had a small salary line, but because we have an additional request for the field maintenance program, there's expenses associated with that. And so we just needed to correct that error and make sure that our totals were capturing that dollar amount.
Right. So what that in essence did is it moved, the last time we saw this forecast document, we were at a $4.5 million deficit. What that correction did is moved the conversation up to a $4.72 million deficit. So starting at that point, we then have continued to scrub the budget, the budgeting document and revenue analysis in several ways. The first thing we did is we looked at our senior means tested circuit breaker program that we're rolling out this year. And we had funded that, if everyone remembers, we had funded that in months ago, anticipating using the full $500,000 of unlevied tax money from prior years. We were going to reallocate that $500,000 from an unlevied position to the budget to pay for this item. After further consideration, we realized that our max exposure within the community for this program was approximately $400,000, not $500,000, which allowed us to free up an additional $100,000. So that dropped our deficit from 4.7 to $4.62 million. Continuing from there, we have agreed that it would be prudent to accelerate some capital purchases for next year using fund balance this year. So we know we're going to have some turnbacks this year, and by reallocating some of that money rather than having it drop to fund balance, we're going to accelerate this purchase of an ambulance. That would be $404,000, and the end result of that effort is to again further drop the deficit from $4.62 million to $4.21 million. So little by little we get there. We are also reducing the education level services request. This is from a presentation made by Dr. Austin from last night by $490,737. That has the effect of dropping it from $4.21 million to $3.7 million. We are applying the unused non-excluded debt capacity from our forecast this year. And again, that added another $200,000, dropping the deficit to $3.5 million. Our group insurance, every year at the beginning of the forecasting process, because we don't know what the cost of the following year's health insurance cost to the municipality as far as employee benefits goes, we don't know what that will be until later in the season. Every year we estimate a 10% increase over the prior year as a conservative measure to make sure that we can afford whatever actually comes out. What we're realizing this year is the increase was a little over 5%, down from our projected 10, which is about normal, about what we normally see. And what the end result of that is it freed up $375,800 again to affect the deficit by moving it down from 3.5 million down to 3.1 million. We further scrubbed our legal services expenses and identified some money that some expenses that we were more appropriately applied both to COVID reimbursement and to the water company. So those expenses now are another $50,000, and again, dropping our deficit from 3.15 million down to 3.1 million. The end result is I talked about removing the additional requests from all three buckets, from the municipal side, the educational side, and the capital outlay, in order to bring us to a balanced budget. By doing that, we ended up with a surplus of $274,198. Our traditional approach at this point would be to reallocate those surplus dollars against the lists of additional requests that have been pulled and add some items back in. I will let the board know a couple of things are pending. One is next week. If you remember last week, we heard from Randy Sylvester about some proposed fee changes to the transfer station. Those proposed fee changes were going to result in approximately $150,000. That would again further drop that deficit by another $150,000, thereby increasing our excess from 274 up 150. That's not represented here because you haven't voted that yet. You're taking that back up next week after a 2-week period for comment. The other item that is pending is I have asked the Board of Assessors, after speaking with the assessor, Aaron Walsh, about the available overlay account, which is funds that are traditionally used for allocating abatements to residents that qualify. Over the course of several years, that overlay account can build if they're not using the full amount allocated every year. And traditionally, every couple of years, we release funds from that overlay account back into the budget process to offset costs of other items. This year, I am recommending, again, after speaking with the assessor, that the Board of Assessors consider releasing $200,000. That board meeting is being held tomorrow. Thursday. And when if that were to happen, that would add, again, another $200,000 to our surplus. So the intent would be, once we have that final surplus amount, then we look back at the additional requests and basically buy back into the budget the items, some of the priority items that have been removed. At that point, once we're all done with that effort, we will, and by the way, there's probably going to be a couple of more shifts in the forecast over the next week or so, as we plan all of those out, and we come up with a final excess or surplus. We would again buy back some additional requests and then land on the remaining additional requests that did not get into the base budget that we can afford within our revenue, available revenue. We would then have some decisions to make. We spoke with the forecast group today about a series of what I would hope would be productive meetings to discuss the plan forward for town meeting, about whether or not an override would be appropriate, or if other funding options were somehow thought of, or if we found ways to further reduce the additional request asks. So all of those are still on the table. This is not a final product, but it is an update to our existing forecast.
Great. Thank you, Tom. Michelle, I might ask you to call up that other PowerPoint. Joe and Bill, I think maybe as a way to set a little additional context, and as well to just kind of put a little color on what Tom, sort of where Tom left. Okay, Michelle, if you can go to the next slide, please. So as Tom mentioned, according to Massachusetts general law, we have to prepare a balanced budget for town meetings consideration. That means that our expenses have to equal our available revenues. And again, while Tom mentioned that one of the possibilities that we're talking about is an override, I just want to kind of, for benefit of all of us, because that the way this would happen is that since an override requires a ballot vote, we have to leave town meeting with a balanced budget. So typically what in a situation where there's an override, a municipality provides a base budget that is a balanced budget and then an override. And so the vote at town meeting is a contingent appropriation that is pending, the outcome of the ballot. So that is the process. And I'd also point out that when we started this process and we had a $7 million deficit, one of the questions that we all had was, will that base budget be something that can be afforded by level services? If you think about it, going into town meeting and saying, could we have some additional money for some new services, is more desirable than going into town meeting and saying, we need to raise your taxes in order to pay some of our obligations. So, if you think about our deficit, we started at 7 million. A few weeks ago, it was at 4.6 million. And what we've determined is that we can support a level services increase. But I would also point out that what we have also determined is that our available revenues cannot support all of the budgets that have been requested, that have been put forward at this time. Michelle, if you could go to the next slide, please. So just kind of where we are right now is, we have, as Tom mentioned, the forecast right now is showing an excess or a surplus of $274,000. That is using $2.4 million in fund balance. We've already got that in there. We're also using $400,000. We're accelerating an ambulance purchase. So I would say we're kind of using $2.6 million of fund balance. As Tom mentioned, there may be some additional good news coming with overlay and transfer station fees. And we would point out that we are awaiting information about the American Rescue Plan. So that is something that could actually, change this picture to a significant degree. So what's not in our budget? What's not in our budget is about $800,000 in municipal requests, 1.6 million in education requests. Now that was originally about 2 million, but the school department has identified the potential use of some ESSER federal funding. So the actual amount that would be needed is just under 1.7 million, $500,000 for capital, and the additional recurring expenses include 36 people. And that is a large enough number that we would also need to include funding for any sort of benefits, including insurance and Medicare. And right now we're anticipating that's about $200,000. So where we are when you net all these things out is that we are still about $2.9 million short of funding all of the requests that we have. So, you know, the number has come down quite a bit, but there is still a significant shortfall. Michelle, if you could go to the next slide, please. Just as a recap, and again, some of these numbers have changed. The municipal budgets are seeking a total of a $1.7 million increase, which is a 5.8% increase over prior year. That is a level services increase of 3.1% and additional requests of about 2.7. Based on the most recent numbers from the school department, the school budget is looking at a requested increase of a total of $4.6 million or 8.2%. The level services increase right now is about 3.6%. We're using fund balance to fund to offset temporary revenue loss and some one-time positions. And then there are also some additional requests. Michelle, if you could go to the next slide, please. In terms of the requested items that are not included in the forecast, this is just a look of the number of positions, and it breaks out the request, again, 2,874,000 into personnel and expenses. So we have a couple options. Where do we go from here? One option is that we can reduce the request. We can take some stuff out. Another option is that we go forward with an override. Those of you that were attending the joint meeting held on December 22nd heard us talking with the advisory committee and school committee on the override process. And then a third option is to use additional one-time money, whether that's our fund balance or, again, the potential for the American Rescue Plan. Michelle, if you could go to the next slide, please. This is the taxpayer impact. This is using the model that we saw last week. If we were to go for a $2.874 million override, on the average assessed value home, that homeowner is going to see next year about a 2.9% tax increase, just kind of business as usual. That's Proposition 2.5 plus community preservation. A $2.9 million override would cause that tax increase to go up to about 5.9%. And for those of you that kind of like, some people like percents, some like dollars. For the dollars, again, status quo, your tax bill will go up by $302 next year. If we had an override of 2.9 million, they would go up by an additional $333 for a total tax increase. That 5.9% tax increase is about $635. Now, this is the average assessed value house. It's valued at about $875,000. So if your house is assessed at lower than $875,000, that dollar increase will be less. On the other hand, if your assessed value is higher, the dollar increase will be higher. Slide, Michelle. People have also seen that we have something called a forecast sensitivity model. And this is just taking a look because, as a board, one of the things that we like to do is not just look at how the decisions we make affect next year, but we want to look at we want to look 5 years out. We like to take a longer view. And this is just pulling from the forecast sensitivity model. If we had a $2.9 million override, that would balance our budget for FY22. And if you see on the top of the screen, the deficits from FY23 to FY26, they range from $500,000 to about 1.3 million. Those are manageable deficits. We've had deficits of that degree in Hingham before, and they are manageable. If we assume a 4.5% growth in the education budget, which has been sort of the recent status quo or level services increase, that deficits actually grow. In 2023, it's about $2.1 million, and it grows to about $8 million in 2026. And, you know, we like to say that we like to try really hard to balance budgets. We try to look for different ways. We try to squeeze money out of funds. Those of you who have been attending our meetings, I hope that you can appreciate the time and effort that we're putting in to scrub all these numbers to try to bring as much funding forward as possible. Deficits that exceed $2 to $2.5 million, particularly if they're in, you know, if they're in the next year or 2 years out, just become more challenging. It's tougher for revenue to grow. It's tougher to find. Bob Curley on the advisory committee likes to call it the secret sauce. That's a lot of secret sauce to try to have to find in a short time. Michelle, if you could go to the next slide. So let me, Joe?
If you can just go back that slide one,
yeah.
Michelle. So the numbers at the bottom, those deficits, those are annual deficits. That's not cumulative. Is that correct?
That's
so
correct. It's right. The cumulative is about 18 million.
Yeah, it's approaching 20 million. Yeah.
Yes. Yes.
Okay. Sorry.
And so, no, thank you for the question, and we'll do that here too. You know, there's been a lot of talk about one-time money. Can we use one-time money? Should we use more one-time money? These are things. These are things we have to talk about. But I want to show you. If you look at the top, if we use one-time money in to balance 2022, we solve our deficit for 22. But notice that we have a deficit of $3.5 million in 23. So, you know, some people have said, it's been suggested that, you know, perhaps the town use fund balance or use some other one-time money to try to close the budget gap this year, and that we defer asking for an override until next year. If we do that, we have to understand what it means. And what it means is, assuming 2% budget growth, our starting point in 23 would be a $3.5 million override without adding anything else. And we would be going to town meeting, and we would be saying to town meeting, unless you approve this override, we're going to have to contract services. And if you look at the bottom of the screen, if we assume a 4.5% growth in the education budget, that deficit goes up to $5 million next year. And the cumulative deficits are listed there from $15 to $32 million. And so, you know, again, I would make the point that if we use one-time money for 22, we're going to have a big hole that we're going to have to dig out of in 23. And if we decide to use that one-time money again in 23, then we've got another hole the year after. And we could be in a situation, as the town was in many years ago, where it depleted its fund balance very quickly because we didn't have enough revenue to support our expenses. Michelle, if you could go to the next slide. So just a couple additional considerations. You know, in terms of revenue, there are no large development projects on the immediate horizon. At least for the next few years, we can't count on a big boost in new growth. And while our board is looking at fees, and we will continue to look at fees, we have been told by taxpayers that, you know, a fee is a tax by another name. And again, I think we're trying to be mindful of the cumulative impact of actions we take on our citizens. In terms of expenses, we should be mindful that the budget requests that we have, which are a total of 36 new full-time equivalent positions, would result in salaries increasing by an additional $2 million. And that's the largest and fastest growing part of our budget. We have benefited in the last several years from low inflation. The inflation rate actually in the last year was something like 1.4%. That has actually allowed us to be able to continue to keep our expenses pretty flat. And a question is whether we're going to be able to, whether we can count on that. And again, if we look at our largest budget, our education budget, it's our largest budget, it's our fastest growing budget. And in some years it's growing twice as fast as revenue, which is creating a little bit of imbalance. And as we're looking ahead at how we move ahead as a town, I think that that's something that we're going to really, we're going to have to examine. I think there's another consideration here, which is the cumulative effect of all the great work that we're all doing and all of the services and very worthy additional requests we're advancing on taxpayers. We are expecting a debt exclusion for Foster School and potentially a new public safety facility. That public safety facility paves the way for a senior center renovation. And while the tax increase will not happen for those until fiscal year 25, because the big tax increase doesn't happen until the facility is built, we are expecting next fall to go to town meeting and ask taxpayers for funding. And I think we are all in agreement that Foster School is our biggest infrastructure priority. And as we're looking forward, our board, and I know our colleagues on the school committee are also looking at how we move forward in a way that does not jeopardize community support for Foster School. Michelle, if you could go, I think there's one more slide. Oh, this is just a look at, this comes from the financial planning model, but this is just a look at what happens to property taxes for a $100 million debt exclusion for, that would be maybe Foster School and the public safety facility. We don't have them both costed out, but if you look at some of these buildings and what they've been built in other communities, you can get to $100 million pretty quickly. That's the impact on property taxes. Property taxes that would take effect in 2025. So again, I bring this up to say that as the board and the town is looking at all these very difficult decisions that we're trying to make and trying to help our community, move past COVID and continue to provide, excellent services. We're also trying to keep an eye towards the long term and some of the important projects that are on the horizon. Michelle, I think there's one more. So as Tom said, we will continue to update the forecast for new news. We continue to monitor the status and the details of the American Rescue Plan. We continue to look for opportunities to reduce our budget requests. And as Tom mentioned, over the next few weeks, primarily through the forecast group, we will be having conversations about how we move forward. It is our sincere hope that that your elected and appointed town leaders can go into town meeting together in consensus on a path forward. Hingham has been most successful when that has been the case, and I hope that the citizens who are on this call know that your town elected and appointed leaders are working very, very hard to determine a path forward that is in the best interests of the town. We are committed to working together. We are committed to exploring different options. And, from a timing perspective, we have to conclude the warrant by the end of March, because we're planning to hold town meeting on May 8th. So it's going to be a very busy next few weeks. We have a lot of work to do, but we are committed to trying to do our very best to do what is in the best interests of all the citizens of Hingham. So Bill and Joe, you've sort of seen a lot. Maybe Michelle, you could close that out. I know that there's some members of the audience who are interested in making some remarks, but I'd like to first ask Joe and Bill if you have any questions or comments about the forecast, the path forward. Joe, why don't you lead off?
Sure. So thank you for an incredible presentation, very thorough, really shows where we're at and our options for the future. One of the funding sources that you mentioned, the American Rescue Plan, which is the expected federal funding. I view that, and I think you view that, as one-time money. That's not recurring funds. And it would be, in my view, dangerous to be depending on that as a way of balancing our budget. It's in my view, similar to fund balance. Is that your assessment as well?
Yeah, I think, one of the things I'm sort of interested in, if American Rescue Funds come, is do we have any flexibility in being able to spread them out a little bit over time? What sort of flexibility do we have? Because I think the more flexibility we have on both the revenue and expense side, the more choices we'll have.
Yep. No, in terms of your analysis, it's spot on. I really don't have any questions. I've reviewed it previously, and thank you for the presentation.
Bill, questions on the forecast, comments?
Yeah, so first of all, I know Mary, you, Tom, Michelle, and a lot of people have been doing a lot of work on this. So thank you. I know you've done a ton of work in the past week. So I appreciate everybody's efforts. My first question is along the lines of Joe's first question. With respect to the Recovery Act money, do we know when we're going to have definition on that? And can we hazard a guess on how much we might be getting? Tom?
Tom?
Yep. So we did receive a correspondence this afternoon from Representative Lynch's office that suggested for the municipal support, Hingham would be seeing approximately $2.4 million. What we don't know is any of the guidance on how we're going to be able to use that money, the appropriate use of that money, and what would be authorized or not. Nor do we know how it would be meted out, when, et cetera. And I also it's also unclear to me, and I think this is true, that there were different pots of money available through that act. One was municipal support, and another was educational support. So I think that there's more than just that 2.4 that's going to be available. But again, we haven't got that. There was a very preliminary effort by, I think, the representative's office to try to keep us informed with what they knew at the time. So they sent us that email letting us know that there was approximately 2.4 million coming in support for municipal government, but that might not include what we would get for the educational support. And again, how that is going to be able to be used is still a massive question.
So, and that's great news. I mean, 2.4 is wonderful, yeah. Right? And I'm assuming it's going to be used similarly to the COVID relief funds that we've been using this past year. So if we can make an argument for a nexus between the need in COVID, which I think Dr. Austin has done, and I think you're doing that, we can probably use this money toward 2.9. Correct?
Potentially. And this goes to what Joe is asking, is we want to make sure that we're not digging ourselves a hole in future years by paying for recurring costs with money that's only going to be available from the federal government this one time. That said, like, Mary is suggesting, first of all, more money is better than less money. And second, I think we need to evaluate very carefully the guidance we're getting. One of the things I am hearing is that it can be used for, which is different than the CARES Act, is it can be used for potentially for lost revenue. So for compensating for lost revenue, which is new and different from the CARES Act. So that's helpful, but right now we're already contemplating filling that need with our existing fund balance. So that may not change the bottom line for us very much, but either way, again, more money is better than less money.
And I mean, because when I was hearing that, I mean, Dr. Austin has called his budget the recovery budget, COVID recovery budget. So right there, he laid out an argument that it could go toward that. And, you know, a lot of talk this week that I've seen about, you know, the size of our fund balance which is substantial, and questions as to why not just use fund balance. And am I correct, Mary, that the slide you showed about what if we plug the holes with fund balance from 22 through 26, the problem is that with an override, the levy capacity increases, the fund balance plugs the hole, but it doesn't allow for benefits, growth, steps, things like that. Do I have that correct?
I mean you know, because an override is a permanent tax increase, and I'm not, I don't want anybody to think I'm advocating here. I'm explaining. An override is a permanent tax increase. So if you approve an override of $4 million, it grows by 2.5% the next year. So you have $4 million plus 2.5%. So that's, you know, that's why an override in a lot of cases is sort of a correction, if you will, because it's an inflow of revenue year after year, where fund balance, one-time money, whether it's fund balance or recovery, you're kind of plugging a hole. But if you're paying for things that are permanent in your operation, you've only paid for them 1 year, and then you have the next year to figure out how you pay for them. So those are things that we have to think about, because there are implications, and so we have to look at both.
Understood. Okay. Thank you again. The slides are very helpful.
Yeah. I'd add one more thing about, you know, understanding the strings that, you know, kind of go with this money. Just again, for purposes of illustration, the COVID money that the town received last year, which was about 3.6 million, we can't use that for permanent positions. We have to, the positions that we have to be, if we use them for personnel costs, it has to be directly COVID related. I think it's been our experience with the COVID money that there are a lot of strings and requirements, and a really important question with this American Rescue Plan is what sort of strings and requirements there might be. I think the good news is that this is moving through Washington pretty quickly. So we will hopefully start to get information about what it can and can't be used for. It's better to find this out now than in 2 weeks. So hopefully those details will keep coming.
And Mary, you said that one of the restrictions on the CARES money is that we could not use that money for full-time employee hiring?
For budgeted positions. Tom, can you?
I muted myself. Yes, so anything that was budgeted the prior fiscal year is not eligible for CARES Act funding.
Okay.
So again, I mean, that may not be the case with this money, but you know, one of the things I think that we want to think about as a town to best position ourselves to give ourselves maximum flexibility is to think about, you know, just think about different options. And I know we've talked to the school committee about perhaps, you know, could any of the additional, more of the additional positions be contract positions? Because, you know, if you do that, it gives you access to different funding sources, and, you know, maybe that gives some flexibility in the future. I also understand that that's easier said than done because of collective bargaining restrictions. But I think the more we're all kind of looking in the eyes of being flexible, the better, especially as we learn about how these funds, about the restrictions for using these funds. So, yeah, Bill, anything else?
No, thank you.
Okay, I notice a couple of hands. I'm going to ask that when recognized, if you could please state your name and address for the record. If you could please direct questions and comments to the chair. If I can't answer them, I'm happy to deflect. And I'm also going to ask that if you have more, if we could just kind of ask one question at a time so that we have an opportunity to hear from as many people as possible. I'm happy to go back to somebody, but sometimes we get additional hands up as we move through, so I would like to do that. I'd first like to recognize Kaya Fix, and I apologize if I've mispronounced your name, but welcome. Ms. Fix?
Thank you. Just had to get myself straightened out here. Kaya Ficus, 2 Bishops Lane. First, thank you. It's incredibly helpful to have these open meetings to be able to understand the process and the tremendous amount of work that you and all of our other volunteer and elected officials do in town. I do want to make the comment, as you are evaluating the collateral impact financially to the town, about the potential collateral risk. And that is a social risk to our children who are indeed, as the presentations from our school committee and from Dr. Austin have indicated, suffering from an achievement gap that is exacerbated by the pandemic. And if we do not fully fund the schools and take into account the thoughtful work that Dr. Austin's team has done to come out with a budget that frankly falls short of some of our expectations and hopes and dreams for our children in the schools in Hingham, that our kids will lose more and more ground. So please do, I very much appreciate the consideration about the potential impact to our town finances, but there is impact to the citizenry that goes beyond dollars. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Ms. Ficus. And I would just say too that Selectman Ramsey and I both have children in the public school system right now. We're sort of bookends at different ends, but we and friends and neighbors are experiencing some of the same things that you're describing. So thank you for joining us tonight, and thank you for speaking up. Ms. Garland?
Okay. Hi, Sue Garland, 18 Maryknoll Drive. Thank you so much. Incredibly informative presentation once again. I appreciate all of the effort and time that went into it. Just a quick clarifying question. I was a little confused when I saw the numbers on the education budget. So is this new budget proposed even a level services budget, or is it cutting things additional?
Yeah. So again, all we've done is kind of repackage things, but last night, Dr. Austin presented a school budget. It was a $967,000 reduction, and that's what's reflected here. So in the level services budget, we have $60 million for the schools, and then again, you saw that list of items that are, that we are proposing to be funded in another manner. There's another 1.6 million in that. So it's the complete budget.
So where did the 1.6, the 1.6 is getting funded from what?
That's what we're still figuring out. That's part of that 2.8 that we're still trying to figure out how to fund.
Okay. So one other quick question then, you mentioned about, if we had to go to town meeting and say, if we don't pass this override, we have to cut all these services. I don't think that that's a bad thing for the town to hear. If the town and the people of the town really want all of these services, let them know you need to pay more in taxes to get them. So I don't think that's a bad message to be sending, just my personal opinion.
Okay, and thank you, because part of what we're trying to get a sense of here is, what's important to the citizens and the taxpayers, because at the end of the day, it's the 20, it's the, the 16,000 voters in this town that make these decisions. And it's helpful to hear, people's reactions to these things, because again, we have a job to do, which is to put forward services and programs and things that reflect what the citizens of this town want. So I'm glad to hear that. I wouldn't have thought of that, but I appreciate you bringing it up. Thank you. Mr. Corbett?
Hi, Greg Corbett, 70 Winter Street. Thank you, Chairman. Thanks for the financial forecast update. What I wanted to say is I share your concern about using one-time money, given the expected financial situation in future years, whether that is using one-time money either from the new congressional appropriations or from fund balance. And I think, of course, the answer, we all know where this is headed. The answer is using both, using some one-time funding, as you've shown in the level services budget, and an override. Members of the advisory committee said at one of their meetings last week, quote, "It's inconceivable that there would not be an override under our current circumstances." And I think we all know that's where this is headed. And my point and question is the Board of Selectmen should consider additional informational sessions on an override, what that means, and people should appreciate that Hingham has one of the lowest residential tax rates of any of our peer towns. And my question to that is, with respect to the level services budget that you showed on the slides earlier, you indicated 2.6 million, I believe, being allocated from fund balance. And my specific question to you is, with that allocation from fund balance, how much would that leave in fund balance?
Yeah. Thanks. So thank you for the questions and the comments. So with respect to your question, and I think I gave a wrong digit, but right now in our forecast, we are proposing to use $2.4 million in excess unassigned fund balance, and that's $900,000 for the school budget for lost revenue and one-time services, and it's $1.5 million in local receipt revenue that isn't just going to bounce back like meals tax revenue for this next year. So as of June 30th, 2020, our excess unassigned fund balance, so above our 20% threshold, was about $6.3 million. And so that would leave, I'm gonna have somebody else do that math, whatever, that's the difference. Mr. Corbett, if you're asking it as far as total fund balance, I don't have those numbers at my disposal, but if you look at the fund balance memo or the Inside Town Finances, you can see the total fund balance level as of June 30th. And let me just make a couple other points. I think some people may have an idea of where this is going. I don't feel like I'm one of them yet, because I think we're still kind of absorbing all this information, and the uncertainty of the American Rescue Act makes that tough. There's just a lot of moving parts. I think, as we're looking at all this, you may be right that the answer here is some kind of a balance of things. That kind of seems to be how we do things in Hingham. A big part of that is going to be understanding what we can and can't use American Rescue money for, because if I'm a taxpayer, I'm expecting that you're going to ask me to raise my taxes as the last resort. But also, in answer to your question, to the extent that the town is going to put something forward, we most certainly are going to need to work with our colleagues and the school department to get out the word to the public, because that's our responsibility. That's been done in the past with when the town's considered these things. I think about when we were buying the water company, we had a couple public information meetings. So you're right, that's going to be a very important part, because people need to know what they're voting for, and we need to give them an opportunity to answer questions. Priya Howell?
Hi, thanks, Mary. Priya Howell, 26 Del Pret Drive. Thank you, as everyone else has said, for the presentation. It's really helpful. It's particularly helpful to see, the projections going forward. I think the unfortunate thing about Prop 2.5 is that it doesn't really consider what the cost of providing services is. It just caps your tax growth at 2.5%, no matter what it realistically costs to provide the services that a town needs to provide. As you mentioned, our budget for the schools has been growing at about 4.5%. And I think, most of that is salary increases pursuant to the collective bargaining agreements, which are, approved by the school committee. And I don't think, at least my understanding is that what we're putting in to pay for our teachers is not something that's drastically above market. If anything, I've heard from Dr. Austin that we have fewer teachers than other towns do. And I think that's reflected in our student to teacher ratios. So one thing I think that we might just need to think about is that if the cost of providing the services that the town expects requires our revenues to increase by more than the 2.5%, we may just need to get our minds around the fact that periodically we have to catch our revenues up by having an override. But I just also had a question on your model. When you were modeling 2% budget growth, does that mean that you were assuming that all the budgets were going to grow 2%, but our revenues would grow the full 2.5%? Or were you only growing the revenues by 2% as well? And then sort of the second part of that is you showed a couple of permutations, and I was wondering if it might be possible to show what would happen if our school budget continues to grow at 4.5%. You showed, I think what you showed was if it grows at 4.5% after we do an override this year, then it will be at like a $7 million deficit in like fiscal year 2026. But what would it look like if we didn't do an override this year and it still continued to grow at 4.5%? And what would it look like if we did an even bigger override this year? Because when as you mentioned, when you do a bigger override, then that additional money also grows by 2.5%. So
right, sure. And so, Priya, thank you for all that. I will tell you that the forecast sensitivity model is actually available on the town website. We're going to update it tomorrow because we updated it for this financial forecast, but you can actually download it and you can do all those scenarios. I will tell you that the revenue in general, the revenue is growing based on our 5-year forecast, which is revenue growth at 2.5% in line with Prop 2.5, plus new growth estimates that we have based on information from our assessor's office. So our new growth is above the 2.5%. And then we also have excluded debt in there from our debt schedule. So the revenue is actually, if you look over the next 5 years, our revenue is actually growing by about 3% a year. I think, in some years it might be 2.8, 2.7, but those pieces are growing. So we will have the model, an updated model up on the website tomorrow for you to, so you can look at all those different scenarios and see what, what things look like. The one thing I would say is that, when we're thinking about an override, one rule in Massachusetts is that we have to tell the taxpayers what we're spending it on. So one thing that we can't do is we can't say, we'd like to do a $6 million override and we're going to spend 3 million of it. And then we're going to hang on to the other 3 million, or, we're going to figure out what we're going to spend that on. That's not allowed under Massachusetts law. So that again is a consideration that we have. I am noticing that there are a couple hands from members of the school committee. I'm observing that there's a quorum of the school committee. There are 5 members on this call. I don't know if the committee has called to order or if you're posted, but I'm not sure if the committee is posted and whether members can engage in this conversation because it's not posted. Michelle and Ness, I see hands up. I'm not trying to be difficult, but I'm also mindful of the open meeting law, and I don't know. Tom, I'm kind of looking to you for a little guidance on this.
And I don't, Michelle, do you know where you're posted?
We are not posted.
You're not.
No.
I would
Okay.
recommend that you guys not engage, but you know, that's up to you and Mary.
Michelle and Ness, I'm happy to, Bill or Joe or I are happy to speak with either of you tomorrow. We have been getting, I really want to avoid an open meeting law violation tonight. So I'm going to err on the side of not recognizing members of the school committee, but happy to, happy to speak with you offline. And I would note that I believe that the advisory committee is taking this same subject up on Thursday night. I don't know if you're posted for then, but I hope you understand. We gotta subscribe to open meeting. Is there anyone else who has a question or wishes to make a comment? I see that there are a number of people who are on, and some are names that we're getting to know as we're going through this process, and other are some new names. I just want to extend our board's appreciation. Number one, that you're coming in and you're engaging and you're asking questions, and you're challenging our thinking, which is what we do. I also just want to say that I really appreciate the thoughtful and respectful and constructive way in which we're having these conversations. I know the last year has been really hard on all of us in just so many different ways. And a lot of these decisions feel very consequential. And I know to many of us, they feel really personal. I appreciate that we can have this constructive dialogue, and we look forward to continuing to do this as we work through the budget. Some of you have also written to the board. We encourage you to continue to do that as well. We listen to everything we say. We read everything we're hearing, and we appreciate your engagement. I would also put in a shameless plug that in May we're going to be asking for volunteers to come and support the town in different ways. We have lots of different boards and committees, and certainly engaging as an active citizen is an important part of our town meeting. But I'd also say that if you're interested in playing a bigger role in shaping some of the decisions that your government makes, there are lots of opportunities to volunteer to serve the town, and we'd hope maybe some of you would consider doing that. Okay, so our next agenda item is the discussion of the senior means tested property tax exemption. Michelle, I think this is you.
Sure. We put together a couple quick slides to highlight this. So this was an initiative that was put forward by a previous Board of Selectmen with Mary Karen Johnson and Paul Healy. It was approved by annual town meeting in 2019, and it required that we file some special legislation with the state. That was ultimately signed by Governor Baker this past January. But the purpose of this initiative was to provide targeted tax relief for seniors who have lived in Hingham for a long time and own their houses here, who meet certain income and asset criteria. Basically, to provide this relief to the folks who might need it the most, and for whom some of the tax increases that we've talked about tonight might be the hardest to absorb. This credit is a new exemption that we would offer this year. It's based in part on the senior circuit breaker tax credit that the state provides. And annually, every fall, the Board of Selectmen would set the amount of the exemption that we would offer this group of folks to be between 50 and 100% of the senior circuit breaker tax credit. The maximum credit for the 2020 tax year is about is $1,150. Just to take a closer look at the eligibility, so we're talking about people who have owned and occupied their home in Hingham for at least 10 consecutive years prior to applying for this. If there's a single owner, they have to be at least 65 years old. If there's a joint owner, that person needs to be at least 60 years old. Like we said, they had to have claimed the senior circuit breaker tax credit in the prior year, and that comes with some income requirements that you can see here. So again, for this past tax year, $61,000 for a single individual who's not head of household, $76,000 for the year if you're the head of household, and then a cap of $92,000 for a married couple filing jointly. There's also some other requirements that come with the circuit breaker tax credit. Your property taxes combined with half of your water and sewer expenses can't exceed more than 10% of your annual income, etc. There's also going to be asset criteria that will be set by the Board of Assessors. And then the exemption in Hingham can't reduce the, your overall property tax bill by more than 50%. This is going to be, so Erin Walsh, our assessor, and her team are working on how this will be implemented. This will be good for 3 years and then would require town meeting to re-extend it basically after that time period. So right now they're working on the applications and the instructions, and their intent is to make this available to the public through the website and through other channels on May 1st. Then everyone would have through the summer to apply for this, and they would need to file with the assessing department by September 1st. After the assessor's office reviews and approves all of the requests, they will report the figures back to this board so that you can make the determination about what percentage of the exemption to offer. And then that will be credited on people's tax bills that will be sent out this December. That is our short summary. Any questions?
And Tom, you were mentioning to me earlier that when the board votes budgets, John Coughlin has recommended that this item is being funded out of overlay, but my understanding is he's recommending that we vote this.
Yes.
That's correct. Yes.
Yep. Joe, questions for Michelle on the circuit breaker?
Well, so on this, what is the projected revenue impact?
So we, based on numbers that we got from the Department of Revenue, there's about 500 people in Hingham that apply or that receive the circuit breaker tax credit every year. They were able to tell us that 24% of those folks are renters and therefore eligible for the circuit breaker, but not for our property tax exemption. And then we also learned from them that the folks in Hingham in 2018 received about 90% of the maximum credit. So using those figures, we're looking at about a $400,000 cost to the town. And Tom mentioned that as part of his forecast update. We are budgeting that in the overlay account, proposing to use some of that excess levy capacity that we had been carrying for the last few years to fund this exemption for these people.
Got it. No other questions. Thank you.
Bill, questions for Michelle?
You're muted, Bill.
What, Bill? I think you're muted.
Sorry about that. No question. My comment is I think this is wonderful, an act that we can do to help our seniors.
Yeah, I would, you know, in the last few years, the board has gotten questions about the unused levy capacity and should we levy to the full amount. This particular initiative was 2 years in the making, really spearheaded by our former colleague, Karen Johnson. And we are fortunate that we've identified a funding source, and it's our hope that that will be something that we can do. If you look at sort of tax, if you look at tax abatements or any sort of tax exemptions, Massachusetts law is pretty strict on kind of what communities can and can't do. There's not a lot we can do on our own. And the assessor's website actually has a list of all the different abatements and exemptions that the town offers. Historically, there aren't a lot of people that qualify for some of these things. And so this actually, the circuit breaker, it not only has the potential to impact 400 households in Hingham, but it's over $1,000 a year, which is pretty meaningful. So we hope this is something that the town is going to be able to implement. Is there anyone who has any questions about the senior means tax exemption? Okay, seeing none. Next item of business on the agenda is inside town finances. And sometimes we talk about something that has nothing to do with our agenda, and then there are nights like tonight where it kind of fits. Michelle, if you could put it up on screen. Volume 9 actually talks about the 5-year forecast. We thought it was maybe a good idea for people to get a sense of what this forecast is and why the town uses it. Just as an overview, our 5-year forecast is it's a planning and it's a decision tool. It helps inform goal setting. It helps inform the budget process, as we've been talking. Michelle, if you could advance the slide. It helps inform collective bargaining. One of the things that we do when we sit down to go to negotiate with some of our union partners is we walk through the town's 5-year forecast. It's very transparent. The numbers are all there. Also, because the 5-year forecast is looking out into the future, it allows to early identification of issues. Michelle, if you could go to the next slide. So, if you think about our 5-year forecast, it kind of has it has some parts to it. It has all the different sources of revenue, and those are all the things that are in the green. It's the tax levy, it's state aid, it's local receipts, it's fund balance. And so the forecast shows all that money that's going in, and then it shows all the money that's going out, whether it's a state assessment, an abatement, whether we spend it on capital outlay, employee benefits, the education budget, the town budget. And you notice that there are 2 blue circles on either side. The town has 3 self-supporting entities. We have the Weir River Water System, which is an enterprise fund. We have the South Shore Country Club, which is an enterprise fund. And we have the sewer that is not formally an enterprise fund, but it kind of acts like one. And if you look at the 5-year forecast, what you'll see is revenue for those entities as part of our sources of funds. But that's a little bit misleading, because if you look at the expense side, you'll see an amount of expenses that equals the revenue. So for example, if you look at the water system from last year to this year, the water revenues are going up by about $3 million to really reflect a whole 12 months of operation. As great as it would be for us to have that revenue for the town, the increase in revenue is met with an increase in expenses. So these enterprise funds are neutral to our 5-year forecast. Michelle, if you could go to the next slide. Some people have asked us how we do our revenue projections, and I think one of the very important contributions that Tom has made since becoming our town administrator is he's really challenged the finance team to use a data-driven approach to assessing revenue that not only relies on things like Proposition 2.5 and historical trends, but he also challenges us to look at overall economic conditions. He challenges us to get guidance from organizations like the Mass Taxpayers Foundation. And that sort of discipline and diligence was really, really helpful as we were going through COVID, because we really had no idea what was going to happen to our revenue. And, rather than us kind of, making some assumptions about what would happen, Tom really challenged us to look at those metrics, and the town was very well served in doing that. In general, our tax levy is going up by about 3% a year. That was the question Priya asked. Our state aid in our 5-year forecast is flat. In some years it goes up, in some years it goes down. So to be conservative, we forecast it flat. And our local receipts grow by about 2.5% a year. People may remember from one of the earlier volumes, our local receipts are about $10 million. Half of it is motor vehicle excise tax. Another big piece is ambulance revenue. If you could go to the next slide, one of the things that we've been talking about tonight is how do we increase revenue in the town? How do we do that? And we just thought it would be helpful to remind people of some of the actions that our town has taken recently to grow revenue. We adopted the meals tax. Those of you that were at that town meeting may remember it passed by like 2 votes. And what a great thing it was for the town. The meals tax, we get over $800,000 a year in meals tax revenue pre-COVID. 10 years ago, we got 0. So this has been great. The legislature, by the way, had been talking pre-COVID about increasing the percentage for meals tax revenue. Our sense is that coming out of COVID, that's probably put on the back burner, but that may be something down the road. We created our own ambulance service. So instead of a private ambulance company getting all the revenue, we collected. Ambulance service generates $1.4 million a year for the town of Hingham. So like that ambulance that we were talking about buying for this next year, that's going to help us generate $1.4 million of revenue. And every 3 years, we review fees and permits. Randy Sylvester came to us last week, our DPW superintendent, and said, hey, I reviewed our fees and permits, and I think some of our fees at the transfer station are low, particularly with respect to commercial waste. So we're constantly looking at those things. New growth. So what have we done to encourage new growth? Because that's really, that's a pretty big deal too. We have maintained a single tax rate for residential and commercial properties. Residential rates are typically lower than commercial rates, and we are hoping that doing that will help attract businesses to Hingham. Town meeting authorized something called Chapter 43D, which accelerates commercial development primarily through the permitting process. And some of you may remember that we established a South Hingham study group to work with residents, businesses, and planning experts to figure out how South Hingham could be developed in a way that balances the need for new growth with protecting the residential and neighborhood aspects of South Hingham, and that is also mindful of growth and how to establish the infrastructure. And the other thing that we try to do, and you saw this with JR tonight, we try to bring grants in. Grants are just one more way to bring money in. And in 2019, we actually brought in $2.8 million in grant funding. The biggest grant, Ken Corson is sort of our grant master. Last year, he alone, I think he delivered like 2.2 million of that 2.8. We were able to get a $2 million grant for dredging the harbor, which meant that we didn't have to use, we had set aside money in fund balance to dredge the harbor. We got the $2 million grant, and that freed up some money for us. Michelle, if you could go to the next slide. So how do we develop expense projections? Again, you've heard this before, we have to have a balanced budget. So the forecast shows one way to spread the revenue. Since we're subject to the limits of Proposition 2.5, most of our expense projections begin with a 2% annual growth. Our debt service and our long-term liabilities, we have funding schedules, so those are a little different. And with healthcare costs, just based on how they've been tracking over the last several years, we assume about a 10% increase every year. But again, due to the great work that our finance team does, particularly Sue Nickerson, our town accountant, we've actually been able to manage growth in health insurance rates to less than 5% over the last several years, which has been really helpful. The next slide. So we were talking about this, like deficits in the 5-year forecast. Should we worry about them? At what level should we worry about them? If deficits are consistent, and especially if they're large, and by large, I think it's over $2 million in a year, that may tell us that our expenses are growing faster than our revenue. And, if we don't address those as a town, that leads to, you've heard people say we have structural deficits. And, the trouble with structural deficits is that once you find yourself in one, your options for fixing it are not great. You either have to reduce services, or you have to increase taxes. And sometimes that tax increase comes at not so great a time. So, you know, as those of you who have been hearing our budget conversations, I think what I hope you take away from this is that one of the things that we as a board and I think the advisory committee are trying to do is to manage our budget in a way that we don't get into a structural deficit that's so big that we have nothing but bad options. And that's why we're being very thoughtful about one-time money. That's why we're asking about growth rates and budgets. That's also why we're not being overly ambitious with our revenue forecast. So this is a little bit on the 5-year forecast. There'll be a document posted tomorrow morning on the town website that summarizes this information. And as with our others, we hope this is just one way of us all educating ourselves about some of these financial matters, so that as we engage in our government, we can all be more informed citizens. Tom or Joe, any questions about the 5-year forecast? We've been talking about it all night.
Mary, I did not see HMLP, Hingham Municipal Light Plant, listed on that chart.
Yep.
Why
Michelle, if you want to go back to the bubble chart. So where they come in, Joe, is HMLP, instead of paying a property tax, instead of being part of the levy, HMLP pays something called a pilot, a payment in lieu of taxes. So there should probably be one more green bubble on that chart that says payment in lieu of taxes. But Hingham Light pays the town $500,000, a minimum of $450,000 a year. It's usually $500,000, and that is another source of revenue. HMLP's expenses do not come into our forecast, so it's purely revenue.
Got it.
Yeah, thanks for asking.
And you've mentioned grants, really, you know, how important not only it is, but how it could be in the future. And I know at one of our prior meetings, Carlos De Silva had asked us, well, how are you pursuing this? Do you have a professional grant writer? That's something I wanted to look at. I think we need to look at it perhaps in conjunction with the school committee, so that we make sure that we are we're taking advantage of all the grant opportunities that we can. That can be a real important source of growth.
Yeah, you know, if you think about it, there's a technical piece to grants, like, you know, the grant that J.R. Fry is applying for.
Right.
But there's also sort of a those things also benefit from somebody with knowledge and expertise in sort of the overall grant writing, where then somebody like JR can really just sort of focus on the technical particulars. Yeah, and this is something the town has, Betty Foley, our Michelle's predecessor, had thought that we were potentially leaving a lot of money on the table, and that a grant writer could help us bring more of that money into Hingham.
Exceptional presentation. I've got no other questions. Thank you.
Bill?
No question, Mary. Great presentation.
Thank you. Anyone in the public have a question about inside town finances? Mr. Ross?
Hi, Joshua Ross, 125 Wampatuck Road. Just a quick question. So on the enterprise funds, on the expense side, are those expenses included in the overall expenses you use for calculation on the fund balance limits?
Yes, they are right now, Josh. And my understanding, and I'm leading back in on advisory experience, so I might be off base. My understanding is that the fund balance calculation, the numerator is the fund balance, and the denominator is what we call total annual expenditures, and that does include the country club and the sewer. And I believe that definition may be a definition from the Government Accounting Standards Board. But I do know that Chair Bob Curley, that's one thing he wants to look at, this year when the advisory committee reviews the financial policy, because the addition of the water company would add about $12 million to the denominator. So I know that's something that the advisory committee wants to look at. Thanks for the question. Anyone else? Okay, Tom, COVID-19 update?
Thank you, Mary. Okay, so the COVID-19 update for today, according to the public health data from the Massachusetts Department of Public Health released last week, the town's designation remains at a yellow, indicating a medium risk of spread within the community. There have been 88 new cases of COVID-19 in Hingham over the past 14 days, and a total of 1,611 cases in Hingham since the start of the pandemic. The average daily incidence rate for the town of Hingham was 26.2 per 100,000 residents, and our percent positivity rate was 2.46% for the previous 14 days. As of today, COVID-19 cases in Massachusetts totaled 559,975. Public health metrics have been trending in a positive direction statewide, including drops in average daily COVID-19 cases and hospitalization rates. However, we are seeing a slight uptick in cases following February school vacation, so please continue to exercise caution. Regarding the vaccine rollout, according to the DPH's daily COVID-19 vaccine report, over 758,000 people in Massachusetts have been fully vaccinated as of today. 86% of the total doses shipped to our state have been reported as administered. At this time, all phase 1 priority groups, as well as the first 2 priority groups in phase 2, are eligible to receive the vaccine in Massachusetts. Eligible phase 2 individuals include people 65 and over, individuals with 2 or more certain medical conditions, and residents of staff of low income and affordable senior housing. In addition, beginning this Thursday, March 11th, K through 12 and early childhood educators, child care workers, and K-12 school staff will become eligible to schedule COVID-19 vaccine appointments. The state recently updated its travel guidance with respect to individuals who have been fully vaccinated as follows. If you have gotten 2 doses of the Moderna or Pfizer COVID-19 vaccines or 1 dose of the Janssen or Johnson & Johnson vaccine more than 14 days ago and do not have symptoms, you do not need to have a negative test before traveling to Massachusetts or quarantine when you arrive. If asked, you must show documentation of your vaccination, including the dates given. If you are vaccinated and have symptoms of COVID-19, you must continue to follow the governor's travel order and related testing and quarantine requirements. In addition, if you were fully vaccinated more than 14 days ago, you are not required to quarantine if you are identified as a close contact of someone with COVID-19. However, you should continue to wear a mask. While experts learn more about the protection that COVID-19 vaccines provide under real-life conditions, it will be important for everyone to continue using all the tools available to help us stop this pandemic, like covering your mouth and nose with a mask, washing hands often, and staying at least 6 feet away from others. Regarding reopening plans, town continues to closely monitor public health data and assess our plans to reopen public buildings. We are working on plans to gradually reopen municipal facilities, including town hall and town offices, the Hingham Public Library, expanded recreation programs, and the senior center. Our top priority has been and will always be the health and safety of our residents, town employees, and business owners. And we will continue to keep the public informed of our plans as those reopening plans progress. Thank you, Mary.
Thank you. Bill, any questions for Tom?
No questions.
Joe?
No questions.
Anyone in the public have a question regarding the COVID-19 update? Okay, seeing none. Public comment on items not on the agenda. Okay, Selectmen Town Administrator reports. Michelle?
Nothing, thanks, Mary.
Tom?
Not today, Mary, thank you.
Joe?
Just a reminder that this weekend we go to daylight savings time, so remember to change your clock.
Thank you. Bill?
Yeah, this Friday night, the high school football team has its first game of the season at Marshfield at 7 o'clock. No, it's a little odd watching football in March, but I'm thrilled that they have a season and looking forward to watching them play a couple games this year.
Excellent. Thank you for that. I have nothing to add. Our board's next meeting will be Tuesday, March 16th. Just for people who check, our agendas are usually they are required to be posted Friday, 48 business hours in advance of the meeting. So we typically post our agendas on Friday afternoon. It's going to be a busy next several weeks. I also just wanted to note that people have been very complimentary, and we appreciate that, of a lot of the great financial work. There's one member of our team who was who's key to all of this, and that's our town accountant, Sue Nickerson, who right now is staffing the advisory committee. So she's in a meeting. I suspect we're adjourning before they are. But Sue just does a wonderful job in terms of the forecast, all the budget documents, all the analysis, CARES Act funding. She is a key member of our team, and if you like the information that you saw, know that Sue Nickerson played a big part in bringing it to you tonight. So we thank everybody for joining us this evening. I accept a motion to adjourn.
I move we adjourn.
Second.
All those in favor, Joe?
Aye.
Bill?
Aye.
Mary? Aye. Thank you, everybody. Good night.
Thank you.